And
Thank you.
we are good.
Thank you so much. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to this Lunch and Learn in May. As you know, we have them the third Wednesday of each month, and they are 30 to 60 minute information sessions about precepting, about pharmacy, and a time that we can all be together. So this is our dean, Dr. John Pezzuto. Um, He previously served as the dean and professor at the Arnold and Marie Schwartz College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences at Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York. Previously, he served as distinguished professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and he held deanships at the College of Pharmacy, Nursing, and Health Sciences at Purdue University, and started the College of Pharmacy at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, where he was the founding dean. Perhaps more noteworthy and interesting, well, that's all very interesting, but also Dean Pezzuto is recognized as being in the category of the top 2% of scientists in the world. And that was a 2020 Stanford University study named Dean Pezzuto among the top 2% of the world's most cited scholars, ranking him number 21 among 80,622 researchers in the medicinal and biomolecular chemistry field. In the overall category of career impact, Dean Pezzuto is ranked in the top 4% of the top 2% of scientists, which means he falls in the top 0.08% in the world. So it's really a pleasure that we have Dean Pezzuto at our university, and thanks for allowing me to introduce him. Take it away, Dean Pezzuto.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Hopefully I can share my screen. Usually people do this for me, but hopefully we'll figure it out. So let me just try that right now. Okay. 1 minute. Is that good?
Yes.
So thanks again. So I was thinking, what might be an interesting thing to present today. And I thought, based on my life and my work, maybe I would talk about science and not so much about academic pharmacy. So a few weeks ago, I was invited to a vineyard, the North Fork of Long Island. And I thought that you might be interested in thinking more about wine and things like that today, and instead of academic pharmacy. So that's what I'm going to tell you about as soon as I figure out how to do it. So my life is in science, mostly has been drug discovery from natural sources. And, I'm sure that you all know about very famous drugs, like shown in this slide. On the upper left side, you see Taxol, the structure of Taxol, next to it, vinblastine, oncovin. And the thing is that you see these are very complicated structures. And as a natural product chemist, it makes people happy to be able to define that structure and look at all the different shapes and sizes and orientations and alphas and betas and so forth and so on. But a compound that I was involved in discovering, shown here, Resveratrol, which probably most of you have heard of, you see is rather simplistic structurally. And at the time of this discovery, rediscovery, I should say, most of my colleagues said that, that's really like a pretty lame chemical, and you really shouldn't waste your time, looking at this, and nobody's really interested. There's no asymmetric centers and all the rest. But being more of a biologist, we became very interested in it. And I'm going to tell you the story of resveratrol today. So the original discovery was actually made in 1939 in Japan. which if you think about it, what was going on in Japan in 1939? You wouldn't think that people were discovering things like resveratrol, but that's kind of where science has common ground throughout the world, I believe. But nonetheless, this chemical was discovered by this Japanese scientist in 1939 from a plant, which is shown here. And basically, if you have the good fortune of discovering a new chemical, you are able to name it. So I know some people who have named chemicals after family members and so forth, but this name in 1939 came along because the chemical is a resorcinol derivative, so the RES, the plant has the VERATR, and it's an alcohol, so it ends up being resveratrol. So in 1939, this star was born, but then it went into hibernation for quite a while. And then there's a couple of things that happened along the way. So one important thing was what's called the French paradox. And maybe most of you have heard about the French paradox. But basically, it refers to this occurrence of the French having a lower disease of heart disease compared to the Irish, for example, even though their diet is known to be rich in terms of fat, cheese, and so forth. And ultimately, what people suggested was that perhaps the slower incidence of heart disease was due to greater consumption of wine. And that's the so-called French paradox. And that kind of floated around for a while, but why grapes? Why wine? What's the difference between grapes and wine and the other billion things in your diet? And then about 20 years after this, which was in the 80s, so about 20 years after that, we made this discovery of resveratrol and basically pointed out that if you think about the unique aspects of wine and the unique aspects of grapes, it's this chemical resveratrol. All the other phytochemicals you can be found in other places, but resveratrol is more uniquely found in grapes and found in wine. So this paper was published in Science. Got a lot of attention. I don't know why, but I have this list of places, where resveratrol was covered based on the Science paper, starting with a few minutes on CNN and then going into radio interviews and papers throughout the world. So basically, it got a lot of attention, and the attention, is why. And of course, it's mostly because of wine. So here, now we're about 25 years later from the paper was published in 97 up until now. A lot of things have happened in the life of times of resveratrol, who I personally think of resveratrol as my friend. I've worked with it so long and it's gotten so much attention, but I listed some things here. Uh, television and radio, media, celebrity. I'm going to show you in a few minutes. It's been the topic of over 20,000 papers now. It's been in autobiographies, or in other words, monographs, symposia. People have built their careers and money on it. It's affected my career, not so much money for me. I call it an industrial car tycoon because of patents that have come from it, companies that have started, companies have been sold. There's numerous offspring, metabolites, derivatives, as I mentioned, patents. I wrote one review calling it promiscuous because it interacts with so many targets. And then, not so much today, but when I was talking to them at the vineyard, the main topic was it provides a rationale for drinking wine. Just, we could probably all agree to that. Surprisingly, other people got in the action. In jewelry, for example, here you see this is the chemical structure of resveratrol placed into a necklace and get it in silver or gold. Cartoons came around. I'm going to talk a little bit about life extension, but there's some studies that were done with rats and mice. And here these scientists are talking about their rats having an attitude. And one is saying this wine that they're drinking in the experiment has a timid nose with unusual notes of oak and vanilla. And the other one is saying, oh, I can't believe you're drinking Merlot. So now, if we were all together, I'm sure we'd be laughing a lot, right? I mentioned monographs have been published. Here's one example. Symposia. There's been 4 or 5 symposia just based on resveratrol. This is one that we held when I was in Hawaii. This slide only goes up to 17, but now there's over 20,000 papers that have been published on resveratrol. Science papers been cited at around 7,000 times now. Clinical trials have been performed, mainly in Europe and the US, but you see over 100 trials have been performed. These are actual clinical trials with human beings. And what I did is I went through the literature, looking at some of this 100+ trials, where the results seem to be promising. I'll put it that way. So I'm going to show you a few right now. So one is photoaging, and here is resveratrol being used as a topical. So you can see the pictures on the bottom right with a topical preparation, which shows some improvement in photoaging of skin. It's also been used topically for acne, and here we can see some improvement due to the topical application of resveratrol. Diabetics obviously have many problems. One are foot ulcers, and here we have 50 milligrams a day, two times a day for 3 months, showing improvement in foot ulcers in diabetics. Here's another paper showing that resveratrol might improve arterial stiffness in type 2 diabetics. Another paper showing the improvement of cognitive performance, improvement of brain function. Here, 75 milligrams 2 times a day for 2 weeks. Another showing a reduction in adipocyte size, in other words, kind of a fat reduction idea. And another showing a reduction in blood pressure and fasting glucose, again, in diabetic patients. So I think there's some signs that the chemical actually does have some clinical relevance. It's very complicated because it's rapidly absorbed and metabolites. Now maybe it's the metabolites that have the activity, and so again, it's quite complex. But these are some of the studies I have found in the literature that seem to be, bona fide proper clinical trials. There's many different mechanisms of these 20,000 papers. You can see that, again, it has many different targets and many different mechanisms. So some people, I was actually at a conference and someone said he thought that resveratrol was the greatest discovery since penicillin. And I thought to myself, he must be selling resveratrol because that's obviously ridiculous. But it does have, again, a plethora of different activities. But then there's the other side of the coin, which is, is it really a wonder drug? Or have some people turned it into a snake oil? And I have this quote here, that, we learn from history that we learn nothing from history. So here we have resveratrol, and I don't think most of us don't really endorse the use of snake oils, But here we have resveratrol moving into that realm. For example, this book, which was published. Some people at Harvard, mainly other places, but mainly at Harvard, who basically started a company talking about increasing lifespan and using resveratrol kind of as the poster child. And then this book was published. And do I believe that resveratrol can extend a lifespan to 125 years? Well, I guess not. And do I believe you can judge a book by its cover? I guess so, because if you look at the structure that's on the cover of this book, it's not actually correct. So it kind of gives you a hint that there's somebody has, other motives here. So anyway, a lot of things have happened. I mentioned companies started, companies got sold, people got rich. But I think if anybody, you're going to take a drug and live to be 125, then in the old days, they used to say, then I have a bridge to sell you, the Brooklyn Bridge. So here is an interesting point, I think. So I mentioned that resveratrol is in grapes, and then grapes, of course, can be used for making wine. Most people, frankly, are more excited about drinking wine than eating grapes. And I think that's why it really got the attention. As I said before, actually, when our paper came out, because there's more resveratrol in red wine than white wine, for the first time in the history of the United States, red wine outsold white wine. So that's kind of what was going on. But the fact of the matter is, I've done a lot of work with resveratrol. I've not done any work with wine, but I've done a lot of work with grapes. So I became interested in thinking about how do we convert grapes to wine quantitatively. So the grape people recommend 2 servings of grapes per day. And I've summarized on here that 1 serving of grapes is a half a cup. A half a cup has about 16 grapes. So the grape people would recommend consuming 32 grapes per day, 2 servings. So if you think about making wine from grapes, there's about 2.6 pounds of grapes to make 1 bottle of wine, which means there's about 736 grapes to make 1 bottle of wine. That means there's about 18 berries per ounce. You have a 5-ounce glass of wine. That means there's about 90 berries. Then if you had 2 glasses of wine, you have about 180 berries. Compare that to 2 servings of grapes. And it means that having 2 5-ounce glasses of wine might be equivalent to about 11 servings of grapes. So I like that. Wine, grapes, either way. Probably I'd have 2 glasses of wine, not 11 servings of grapes. So when the science paper was published, it got the attention of the California Table Grape Commission. So table grapes are different than wine grapes. So table grapes is, what you buy in the supermarket and just, have for on your table for, eating grapes. And I went to the executive board meeting, and it's actually in Bakersfield, California, but I went anyway. And I showed them this poster. The American Cancer Society and others have a big program about preventing cancer, and fruits and vegetables. I think most people would agree that more fruits and vegetables in the diet are healthy. And there's a lot of epidemiological evidence indicating that it reduces the incidence of cancer. So I showed them this poster and I said, what do you think is missing here? And obviously they noticed pretty quickly there were no grapes on it. And that inspired them to start a grant program. And that grant program's been going on for about 25 years. This is only a partial example of where grants have been funded by the California Table Grape Commission. It's much, much larger than this, but you see it's throughout the US, some in Europe, some in Asia, and so forth. And basically, after, I should point out that I chair the scientific review board for the California Table Grape Commission. So I'm aware of all these studies and all the data, and we thought it would be good to publish a book summarizing this, and this was published a few years ago, Grapes and Health. So it's not exactly like I'm on a book tour, but if you want to buy a copy, then it's okay. And I'm just joking. If you would like a copy free of charge, an electronic copy, and you let me know, I'll send it to you. And in this book, we talked about all these different areas that, in my view, incredibly have come to light, mainly because of funding from the Grape Commission. We look at heart inflammation, cancer, brain health, eye health, GI, skin, and more. And in all these areas, studies have been performed showing some benefits. Just to me, it's incredible that all these benefits have been unearthed. That at the time when that poster was shown to the commission, nothing at all was known about this. And actually, I'm working on now the second volume, or second edition of this book, and hopefully that'll be published next year. Okay, so since I know more about grapes than wine, in the next 5 minutes or so, I'd like to talk about some of our recent work and ongoing work in this area. So here, I've shown this cartoon, basically something that we all know and we all agree on. You are what you eat. And if you think about, starting off as an infant, ending up as a grown human being, it's clear that, all this tissue and blood and everything else has come from somewhere, and it didn't come from the air. So it must have come from what you eat. And so what you eat is converted into DNA and RNA and protein and energy and heat and waste. And so I think that that's clear. It's not very philosophical. It's factual. So that's point one. You are what you eat. So I put here a very kind of superficial reminder, about genetics. So how many species of humans are there? You'd be surprised how many answers you get for this question. Sometimes if I'm sitting around at dinner and I ask people, how many species of humans are there? Somebody told me there were like 500. So anyway, there's one species of human, right? So we're humans. Right now, there's only one species. But obviously, we're not all the same. So then we say, okay, well, why are your eyes blue or brown? And I put here, what's the difference between the DNA in your eye and your liver? Well, your DNA in every cell is the same. So it has to come down to expression, how the DNA is processed. So we all know this. Sorry to, be so trivial here. But what the point I want to make is it seems to be all about phenotype, the expression, not the genotype. If your liver and your eyes have the same DNA, obviously a lot of things are happening differently based on that DNA. So we've done some studies, looking at diet and how the diet changes the expression of the genotype to the phenotype. And the work has been done with mice. And I won't go into great detail here. But basically we have inbred mice, so there's no big differences in DNA. And we fed them a standard diet or a standard diet supplemented with grapes. And then we look at their genetic expression. So these things in the middle are called volcano plots. So all the stuff at the bottom that's blue, that means if you compare the two groups, one has grapes, one doesn't have grapes, and that's the only difference. The blue part is the same in both. The red part are genes that are more highly expressed, and the green part are genes that are lesser expressed, downregulated. And we've done this in various tissues. We've looked at liver, we've looked at brain, we've looked at colon, we've looked at kidney. And in every case, the genetic expression is changed just by the diet, which I kind of find incredible. I mean, maybe I should have known this, but it took these data to make it clear in my mind. So here's a Venn diagram just showing different groups. Again, the only difference being the grape. So we also had high fat diet, and we compared high fat with and without grape and so forth. And we published half a dozen papers in this area now. And we've shown some other effects, some cognitive effects, for example, in female mice with high fat diets, a little life extension. But the main point I want to make right now is that there's unique genetic expression just based on the diet. And that translates into metabolites, which you can just take my word for it. The grape diet changes the genetic expression. The genetic expression changes the metabolism. And we can show that by looking at these different metabolites. So what this leads me to propose is that we knew you are what you eat, but now what I'm suggesting is you become what you eat in terms of your genetic expression. So in other words, your genetic expression is different based on what you eat. And your genetic expression obviously changes things like eye color, but it also can change sort of cognition. So I don't know if I can get too philosophical about this, but if you think about different societies, and if you think about kind of the general characteristics of different societies, maybe it's based somewhat on their cuisine. So in other words, if I move to Japan and start eating only a Japanese diet, I'll become more like a Japanese person than somebody who lives in Springfield, Massachusetts. So anyway, that's for the future, but I find the whole idea fascinating. And I'm not saying that it's only grapes that change your genetic expression, but obviously your diet as a whole. But using grapes as a prototype, we've been able to show this very clearly. And I think that's the main things I wanted to present today. A good friend of mine who worked on the with me on the California Table Grape Commission was an expert on resveratrol and New York wines. So, he looked at a lot of different New York wines, looking at the different concentrations of resveratrol in the wine. He said 3 to 4 was regular, more than 10 was high. Since I was at this vineyard on Long Island, I looked at a couple of their wines, and we measured the resveratrol content at 35 micromolar, which was, according to Lee, an extraordinary amount. So I don't know if you have questions or how this works from here, but I hope that you found at least some of this a little bit interesting. I don't imagine it's been the typical kind of thing that you see at these lunch and learns. But anyhow, I hope you found this a bit interesting, and thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much, Dean Pezzuto. Yeah, as a natural products a guy interested in natural products myself, this was super, super informative, and I'm sure our preceptors will get a lot out of it as well. So thanks again for the fantastic presentation. All right,
Yeah,
and yeah,
pleasure.
and so we will be signing off, and of course, this will be posted for all of you to view later. Uh, Thank you again, Dean Pizzuto, for your time, and we will see you later. Take
All
care,
right.
everyone.